Come to the Home Depot this month and you'll learn a thing or two. Actually, 3, with 3 free do-it-yourself workshops. Learn how to design and care for your container garden by selecting the best soil and aesthetically arranging your plants. Learn how to install tile flooring, even how to keep your outdoor deck and patio space in the best shape possible. See, it's never too late to learn something new. Register today at homedepot.com/workshops for a do-it-yourself workshop near you. Only at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing.
Welcome to Creating a Family, talk about infertility and adoption. Today we're going to be talking about what you must know about Zika and other diseases when you're trying to get pregnant. This is a topic that was heavily in the news even last year and is still in the news this year, and it's one that we have been getting a lot of questions about. So I think you're going to enjoy it. Here's a sample of what you're going to hear.
Zika can live for a fairly long period of time in a man asymptomatically and then be in the semen. And so if a man only travels to the Zika-infected area, we would recommend waiting 6 months' time prior to conceiving.
Everybody did hear that. Say it again. Say that again, because that's the part that blows people away when this comes up. So say that part again.
Yeah, it does. So 6 months is the period of time that we recommend waiting if the man only travels to a Zika-infected area.
This show is brought to you by Creating a Family, the National Infertility and Adoption Education and Support Nonprofit. I'm Dawn Davenport. I am your host and the director of Creating a Family. And you can find us and all of our many resources, including resources on this topic, at our website, creatingafamily.org. Well, we have been waiting all year, and it has finally happened, my friends. This is National Infertility Awareness Week. We're right in the middle of it. And in honor of National Infertility Awareness Week, Ferring Pharmaceutical is launching a Talk About Trying campaign. And they're doing it to raise awareness, of course, of fertility issues and to empower women and couples to seek help sooner. As you know, that is a recurring theme here with us at Creating a Family, is to get people into specialized help sooner. The Talk About Trying campaign encourages people to share their personal experiences to help others feel less alone. You have 2 opportunities to participate in the Talk About Trying campaign. First, you can share your personal experience on infertility on social media. Please use the hashtag #TalkAboutTrying, all one word. And for every time that hashtag is posted through May 11th, 2018, Ferring will donate $1 to Resolve, the National Infertility Association. So share your story with the hashtag #TalkAboutTrying to help others feel less alone and to support Resolve. They're one of our friends, and we really want to support them. The second way you can participate is to share your personal fertility journeys, again, through May 11th, so you've got some time here, May 11th, 2018, and this is also part of Ferring's Talk About Trying campaign, and this is a story contest, and you're going to find more information about it on their updated My Fertility Navigator site, and you will have a chance to win an all-inclusive weekend getaway for 2 at the Miraval, Arizona Resort and Spa in Tucson, Arizona. You can get more information, the complete contest rules, and other information at their new website. Well, it's actually an updated website, and it is myfertilitynav.com/contest. Again, myfertilitynav.com/contest. So you have 2 opportunities to help others by sharing your story. You know you have a story, so get out there and share it and help some others feel less alone. And we will appreciate it, and so would Ferring. Today we're going to be talking about Zika and other communicable diseases or infectious diseases and why we need to know about them when you're trying to get pregnant. We were going to be talking today with Dr. Jason Franasiak. He is a board-certified OBGYN as well as a reproductive endocrinologist. He is a board-certified technical supervisor in embryology and andrology. He also happens to be the lead physician at RMA New Jersey, South Jersey office in Marlton, And perhaps, in my opinion, most important, he serves on the board of Creating a Family, and he's a friend of mine. Welcome, Jason, to Creating a Family.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is very much a pleasure to be here, and I think that we have some very interesting things to talk about, and I know that these are questions that can be quite confusing and are oftentimes on the news and in the literature and on the front of the minds of folks who are already pregnant or working to get pregnant.
Exactly, and in our audience, as you well know, we have a huge number of people who are in the trying to get pregnant area.
Of course.
Zika is a funny thing this year in the news because it surprised me. We started getting a fair number of questions about it, and quite frankly, it surprised me. And then we, as you know, we have a huge online community, and we always post about the show topics, which, let me pause for a moment and remind people, we would love to have you join us on our social media. You can connect with me personally, Dawn.Davenport1 on Facebook, or you can connect with our Facebook support group, which, let's see, is facebook.com/group/creating a family, or just type in the words creating a family and you'll find us. Or, of course, you can go to our page, facebook.com/creating a family. Anyway, just a plug, we would love to have you. We're one of the top online influencers worldwide in the area of fertility, and we would love to have you join us. All right, so we posted about the show, and so I get this email from somebody saying, is Zika still a thing? And I thought that was actually more the response. I was surprised we were getting questions about it because we're almost never hearing about it in the news. And it was such a hot topic, really, the last 2 years. I guess 2016 and 2017, it was like this time of year, and in particular, in May and June, it was like you couldn't pick up any type of mass media and not read about it. And I'm not seeing it this year. So does that mean that we don't have to, Dr. Franasiak, does that mean we don't have to worry about Zika now?
Yeah, Don, I think a really good question. It's an interesting thing in our world because we're so connected. There's so much news and so many sources of news that those are often the things that drive various aspects of what we think about in terms of trying to get pregnant and trying to get pregnant safely to the front of our mind. And the news oftentimes has a relatively short attention span, and oftentimes
yes.
can go with what is most exciting and what will grab the attention of most. And, I think it's important for us all to be reminded that the Zika virus was not just discovered several years ago, and it has not gone away, and is certainly something that we think an awful lot about as fertility providers and reproductive specialists. The Zika virus is part of a family of viruses, and it's primarily mosquito-borne and spread, and it was actually named for the Zika forest, which is in Uganda, and the first virus was actually isolated many years ago, all the way back in 1947. And
did we know that it had an effect on the fetus back then?
So it certainly had not garnered the international acclaim and news media attention that it did in 2015 and 2016. But we do know that it did have some impacts, and it just wasn't as well studied. And part of the issue was that it was very confined. So it was first isolated in 1947, and in the entirety of the 1950s onwards, really, truly, it was known to really only occur in a pretty narrow band from Africa to Asia. And it was oftentimes a little bit more known for some of the viruses that it's related to. And I think that probably got more attention for the patients who suffered from Zika virus in those areas. And the Zika virus is related to things that many of your listeners may have heard of, such as dengue fever or yellow fever or Japanese encephalitis or West Nile virus. And these are things that are...
I think chikungunya, we'd throw that in there too, because you hear about that one as well.
You do. And I think a lot of these things you hear less about the impact of pregnancy outcomes and more of their impact on the people who contract these diseases. The somewhat fascinating thing about Zika is that it actually causes relatively mild disease if an adult man or woman were to contract it. And it has this interesting property of having issues with pregnancy outcomes and a number of different pregnancy outcomes if it's contracted during pregnancy, which is really where it got a lot of its kind of infamous news over the last couple of years.
Well, and sometimes it's not at all uncommon for adults to not have any symptoms or to not have symptoms that they even notice, may be the more accurate way to say it, which I think is one of the reasons that nobody really thought too much about it. It was kind of like, oh, yeah, well, I'm not sick, so what do I care type of thing, until it made the news, like you say, a couple of years ago for a cluster of birth defects, and we're going to talk about those well, let's go ahead and talk about those. So what was probably not new, but it certainly, maybe it was new, because I remember hearing about a epidemiologist, I believe it was, in Brazil, wasn't it, that noticed what looked like a cluster of microcephaly, small brain size and thus small head size in newborns. And am I remembering this correctly, Dr. Franasiak?
You are, and whether or not this is something brand new or something that's been going on for some time and just has not been noticed is not terribly clear. And I think that what you had mentioned before, if I might just go back for a moment to the fact that
Please, yeah.
Many people, adults, don't have symptoms. I think this is going to be an important point for future conversations that we may have in the show about what we might be doing to best protect ourselves when we're working towards getting pregnant. The Zika virus causes very mild symptoms, as you noted, and many people don't even realize they have it. So, the symptoms that you can get are mild fevers or headaches or skin rashes or a little joint pain. Honestly, there's not anything that can be clearly identifiable that you would say, gosh, maybe I have an infectious disease. It could be just after some travel, kind of feeling a little off.
Yeah,
the symptoms really only last for a short period of time, as many as 2 to 7 days. And people who contract Zika, only about 1 in 4 of them ever exhibit any symptoms at all. But just because they don't have symptoms, that doesn't mean that they are not at risk for potentially passing on that virus to in a woman who's pregnant to the child.
Yeah, in fact, I read some research that indicated that there was, you would normally think, gosh, if I have symptoms, I have the disease, I got it worse. I got Zika, a worse case of Zika. Therefore, my baby stands a greater chance of being impacted. But I read some interesting research, which everyone you can find on the CDC website. I'm going to mention it again. It's cdc.gov/pregnancy/Zika. Anyway, and it indicated that the risk of impact of the birth defects on the baby are really basically no different whether or not the adult, the mother, showed symptoms or not, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, Donna, I think that is fascinating, and I think that one of the things we don't have a clear understanding of all the risk factors that go into this, and until certainly we learn more, we want to be very cautious. And I think that it does stand to reason, and it is the best of our knowledge that the severity of symptoms do not correlate with the potential effects in the child. So really a lot of what we will talk about here will be primary prevention, meaning that if there is even a risk that Zika virus may be in the body of the man or the woman, that we seek to avoid having active forms of getting pregnant until the time has come that we feel the Zika virus has been cleared, whether or not it was present.
Okay, so let's talk a little about where we know that Zika is carried by a particular mosquito. So where are the areas of concern that the mosquitoes may carry the Zika virus? Let's start with the U.S. Are there any states in the U.S. that have recently reported And again, everybody's to know you're going to have to check the CDC website, cdc.gov/pregnancy/Zika. And there's a map there. And you can actually type in the city, the area code of where you're going, and they'll give you an indication of the risk. However, just in general, are there any places in the U.S. people need to be cautious?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as you noted, the Zika virus is transmitted by mosquitoes. It's a very particular type. They're typically daytime biting mosquitoes, and it's the Aedes mosquito. There's two different subtypes, the Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. And these mosquitoes and the virus that they carry have spread kind of eastward around the world, from Africa to Asia, and across the Pacific Ocean, and now into South America, the Caribbean, and parts of the United States. And to your comment, the CDC website is the very best place to go for updated information. This information changes frequently, and so I actually looked at it this morning so we could provide up-to-date information, but for anybody who is listening to this as a delayed broadcast, please do not take this as up-to-date information. Go to that CDC website and look at the map that they have if you are planning to travel to an area or are living in a potentially affected area. As of this morning, though, Dawn, in looking at the CDC website, particularly focusing in the United States, as you noted, there are 2 states which are designated as having previously reported presence of the Zika virus and mosquitoes which transmit it, and that is in Florida and in Texas. But currently, there are no states which have active guidance against the Zika virus or active guidance for active transmission in the United States presently.
We had a slight connection in that one of our other partners, Children's Connection Inc., is an adoption agency in Texas, and I think it was last year they reached out to us to help them help us promote, spread the news that they had a baby whose mother had Zika, and the baby was born with microcephaly, and the baby was put up for adoption, and they were looking for a family to adopt this little boy. And I'm happy to report that we spread the news, and I mean almost they were inundated with people who stepping forward, and they found a family who was located in a place where they had good medical care and good insurance and all that, and that little baby found a home almost immediately. In fact, went home from the hospital with the family. So happy ending. But yes, and this probably would have been in 2017, but the pregnancy was in 2016. So anyway, yes. So Texas has had a few cases of birth defects. Okay, so we've talked about in the U.S., and you mentioned generally. I don't know. Did you mention when you were talking about outside the U.S., did you mention Mexico? Because the entirety of Mexico, except for those areas that are too high in elevation that the mosquito won't live, the entire area of Mexico is considered a Zika-prone area. You may have mentioned that. So Mexico.
I didn't yet, Tom, but you're absolutely correct. So focusing just on areas that are in close proximity to the United States, there are many areas of active Zika virus transmission. And I think this is an important thing for listeners who may be living in those areas, or perhaps more commonly, those who are seeking to build families and are perhaps also looking to travel and take vacation. So these are pretty common vacation spots in Mexico and in the Caribbean. And that presents a big problem for folks trying to determine when it may be safe to begin conceiving once again after traveling to some of these areas where there is, according to the CDC website, active transmission of the Zika virus.
You and I were both at a conference recently, the Pacific Coast Reproductive Symposium, and I ran into a doctor, I believe he was from New York, and who is a reproductive endocrinologist, and he said, I had no idea that many people went to Mexico on vacation until this came up. And it made me laugh. I thought, yeah, I guess you're right. These are people who are, even thinking about taking a baby moon, getting in one last vacation before they, do that next round of treatment or something. Anyway, yeah. That's the thing I think where it often gets people is they're thinking about getting out of the country, and usually, and think about it, someplace warm and nice is where you're thinking. And unfortunately, those might be places that where the Zika virus is prevalent. So, yeah, something to worry about. We're going to talk, let's go ahead and talk about what people can do. Let's say you do want to go to the beach in Mexico, which sounds nice right about now, and you want to enjoy some sun and fun. Should you do that? If you're thinking about trying to get pregnant, or for a lot of our audience, they are scheduling cycles, IUI or IVF cycles, or thinking about going, a lot of people thinking about switching from their OBGYN into a reproductive endocrinologist or infertility clinic. So should you just not go to any of these places?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Dawn. And I think that, one of the things that I'll say is that, fertility for folks is a tough journey, and they give up a lot in their personal lives in order to be able to pursue this goal. And it just seems a little bit cruel to take away all possible fun and relaxation. So, I wouldn't go so far as to say you should just not travel, but I think there are a couple of general guiding principles that are important. Number one, if you are seeing a OBGYN or a fertility specialist, involve them in your plans. It is a common thing in our practice now for us to routinely ask patients about their upcoming and previous travel plans as a result of the Zika virus. And so involving your healthcare professionals in your plans allows them to give you the most up-to-date information that they can. The other thing that I would recommend is begin educating yourself. As we've mentioned a couple of times, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control website, provides great information. Number one, it can help you identify whether or not the area that you're looking to go is a risky place, and places you at risk for potentially contracting Zika. And if that is the case, it talks about general protection. Anybody going to a place with the active Zika virus needs to undergo and take careful care to have active mosquito prevention, and these involve things like insect repellents, covering of your skin, mosquito proofing your home or a hotel area. And so certainly it makes it challenging because many of the things you may be going to the Caribbean or Mexico for sun are not compatible with covering your skin up and staying indoors. Mm-hmm. But mindful to try to do those things to the best of your ability. Okay.
So preventing bites is what you're suggesting. One of the things that certainly when I was pregnant, we were told not to use any form of DEET. Is that still the recommendation, or which I should mention, DEET is a common ingredient in many mosquito repellents? Mm-hmm. Or has the thinking evolved now to allow for use of DEET during pregnancy?
Actually, the CDC website addresses this and goes over a list of safe mosquito prevention that is available for folks. And so that's why I typically will refer patients to.
Okay. So avoid, if you're going to travel to an area where Zika has been known to exist, protecting yourself from bites is your best bet. One of the interesting things to me, and maybe this is common, and it's just something that I wasn't all that aware of until a couple of years ago when I started reading up on Zika, is the risk of exposure to the woman through intercourse with her husband. So I would assume that means in the semen that the Zika virus is pregnant is present. And so let's talk about that, the risk of sexual transmission of the virus from the man to the woman, or I guess either way, but the concern would be from the man to the woman.
Sure. So, Zika virus has been looked at in many different areas of the body. It's been found to live in our blood, to live in our urine, to live in semen, to live in saliva, and to live in the vagina. And there's been documented transmission of the Zika virus from a pregnant woman to her child in her uterus through sex and through blood transfusion. So certainly these things are of great concern, and I think that one of the biggest things for us, of course, when folks are trying to conceive is the risk of sexually transmitted infections. And Dawn, I think going back to what we talked about at the beginning, so important to remember that if you travel to an area that is potentially Zika infected, according to the CDC website, whether or not you have identified a mosquito bite during that time or have infections or signs of an infection, we would still caution and consider that you would be potentially at risk for sexually transmitting the Zika virus because, again, as many as 1 in 4 individuals with the Zika virus have no symptoms at all, and we do not have great ways of testing individuals. And that has been one of the challenges for folks and has led to evolving recommendations. And the most current ones, again, are on the CDC website, but they involve trying to prevent sexual transmission by either abstaining from sex for a period of time after you've gone to a Zika place or using condoms. So trying to prevent Zika virus transmission with condoms. And it can be a little bit confusing for folks because the Zika virus can live for various amounts of time in the man and the woman and place you at greater risk down the road for transmitting it to your child if you were to become pregnant. And the current recommendations are that if you travel to a Zika area, that you should abstain from sex or use condoms, and it depends upon the length of time depends upon who we're concerned about might have contracted Zika. So Zika can live for a fairly long period of time in a man asymptomatically and then be in the semen. And so if a man only travels to the Zika-infected area, we would recommend waiting 6 months' time prior to conceiving.
Everybody did hear that. Say it again. Say that again, because that's the part that blows people away when this comes up. So say that part again.
Yeah, it does. So 6 months is the period of time that we recommend waiting if the man only travels to a Zika-infected area.
Okay.
Yep.
That's unbelievable, really. I mean, that's something that people must know about, and before they, if they're actively trying to get pregnant or think they're going to be soon. All right. So what about if the woman is the one who is traveling prior to pregnancy?
Yes. So there's a shorter period of time because you would the virus itself would be cleared and you would not be worried about delayed exposure in the semen and potentially contracting it down the road. And so what we would say would be it would be 2 months after the woman travels to an area that is Zika confirmed or that there's a concern until they should actively begin conceiving. And if they both travel on vacation, we kind of go with the most conservative. So, of course, both the man and the woman would be potentially at risk. And so the man is the most conservative, and we'd recommend waiting 6 months if they both traveled.
And so in this case, because many in our audience will be doing IVF or IUI, and so the semen will be prepared, is anything in the preparation would kill the virus so that they have less to worry about?
So there's a lot of data which you can read out there about semen preparation for various infectious diseases, probably the most well-known being the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. There's not a lot of data about what we see with Zika virus transmission or titers in semen preps for in vitro fertilization or IUIs. And so we actually don't have recommendations or believe that we can tell patients that it decreases their risk. One thing that can be done, and one thing that we oftentimes will do, is that if a couple is undergoing fertility care and the man is traveling for work or for vacation alone, we can actually freeze his sperm before he leaves and use that sperm for the fertility care, knowing that it was obtained prior to the time that he was potentially exposed to the Zika virus.
And yes, I think if that's something to consider if you're already, and even if the couple themselves are going to be traveling, they would still, if they were going to use the frozen sperm, they would have to only wait I guess that's the 2 months. The current recommendation is 2 months rather than the 6 months. Okay. Now, what we've been talking about up to this point is exposure prior to pregnancy, with the concern that the virus would be in the woman's bloodstream and the fetus would be exposed if she became pregnant. So that's what we're talking about now. But what about if the woman is pregnant? I'm assuming that there's still a risk to the fetus, and perhaps even more so, if she contracts the Zika during pregnancy.
Of course, so that would be the concern. And with any of these, it's becoming pregnant or being already pregnant, contracting Zika virus. If you have a fetus that is there, you have an increased risk of various pregnancy complications. It has been associated with increased risk of having miscarriages or having an intrauterine fetal demise, so a late-term death of the child inside of the uterus. It's also been associated with growth problems of the fetus, so you can have small children or placental problems. And then the big thing that has been in the news that people have been mostly concerned about is what's been termed congenital Zika syndrome. And that's where the Zika virus goes and causes abnormalities in the baby's brain, and you can see those children with small heads or microcephaly or other birth defects. And for those children, we see about 4% having a brain abnormality or 4% having a birth defect if they have an active Zika infection during pregnancy.
Okay, so if you were to have Zika during pregnancy, you have roughly a 4% risk that the child will have birth defects associated with the Zika. Does that risk?
These are confirmed cases. This is from a relatively large study, several thousand confirmed cases of Zika. So not suspected, but confirmed. Okay,
so does it matter when in the pregnancy, what trimester you contract Zika? Does that affect your risk for your infant?
You know, Dawn, as the fertility doc, I'm on the front side of things and care for folks through the very early pregnancy stages. I don't know of data that changes your risk for congenital Zika syndrome throughout the course of pregnancy. If you were to contract Zika during pregnancy, very likely you would be under the care of your obstetrician gynecologist, and I would recommend that you and that individual work with a high-risk maternal fetal medicine doctor and perhaps an infectious disease doctor in order to undergo additional monitoring of the child throughout the course of pregnancy.
I actually did read some of the research, and again, you'll find this at the cdc.gov/pregnancy/Zika website. I did read some of the research, and I'm going to be paraphrasing grossly here, but basically there isn't a slightly increased risk in the first trimester, but there is still a risk in the second and the third trimester. So that's kind of the a Cliff Note version of that. Okay,
that would make pretty good sense to me, as much as of the fetal brain development is occurring kind of in that first trimester, but continues to evolve. And some of these other things that we see with the growth problems and the placental problems can certainly occur throughout the rest of pregnancy.
Yeah, exactly. It makes good sense. So for those people, so if you don't have symptoms, I think you said before is there a blood test that we can do? Let's say you didn't think about it. You went to Mexico, and you're coming home, and you really don't want to wait 6 months, and assuming that your partner, male partner, was there as well. So, is there a blood test? I believe you said that the testing is not particularly accurate. Is there anything you can do to say rule in or out whether you or your spouse or your partner was exposed?
During the preconception phase, where people are looking towards getting pregnant, there really isn't a surefire way to do that. There are blood tests out there that can be obtained, and certainly if you were already pregnant and there was concern, it is very likely your obstetrician and your high-risk OB doctor would order these tests in conjunction with infectious disease. But the safest and surest thing at this point is to abstain from intercourse and trying to become pregnant during the period of time where there's potential risk. So for my patients, I'm not able to order a test that can reassure us with confidence that it is okay to proceed with pregnancy if indeed we are in a time period that there is risk for transmission.
Yeah. Given the risk, I hear what you're saying. And if you're already pregnant, that's a different issue perhaps. Okay. Excellent. All right. Before we move on to talking about other diseases, I wanted to talk about some of our partners. Creating a Family, as you know, is a nonprofit, and we exist, quite frankly, because of the support of our partners who believe in our mission of bringing unbiased, medically accurate information to the patient community. And one of our wonderful partners is Reproductive Medicine Associates of New Jersey. They are a recognized scientific and patient care leader in the field of infertility. They have 10 offices and 21 physicians throughout New Jersey, and they maintain an IVF delivery rate well above the national average, and they offer the latest and validated technical solutions to help hopeful parents increase their chances for success in the shortest time possible. And we thank RMA New Jersey for their support, their long-term support of this show. We really do appreciate it. Now, moving on to talk about other diseases that can affect a mom. We got a question from a woman, and I'm just going to use her initial, but her request, S. She said, I am very prone to vaginosis. We are trying to get pregnant and will probably be referred to a fertility clinic this spring. I am worried that I will get an infection while either pregnant or trying to get pregnant. Do you have suggestions on what to do if I get one, how to avoid it, and what it will do to the baby if I get vaginosis? So let's start with this question. Vaginosis is, I guess, just a vaginal infection, right? Could be caused by any number of things, couldn't it?
It is. So, bacterial vaginosis is when it's all said and done, a pretty broad diagnosis. So I think important to note that that our bodies, as we I think have discussed on a previous call on the microbiome, our bodies are quite infested. In fact, we have more bacteria in and on our bodies than we do our own cells. And the vagina is a place where bacteria live normally. They actually, when in the correct balance, are good for health and good for pregnancy. There can be alterations of the vaginal microbiome, and this is termed bacterial vaginosis. For patients that get this disease, it is typically screened for in your gynecologist's office, usually through a vaginal swab where they look for changes in the vaginal pH, which is the acidity in the vagina, which is regulated by many of the bacteria. And they also look for presence of these bacteria on the epithelial cells of the vagina. Oftentimes, this is then treated with antibiotics in order to try to restore the normal balance of the bacteria in the vagina. Bacterial vaginosis is not recommended as one of the routine screening tests. So many folks who are looking to get pregnant will be screened for a number of infectious diseases. Bacterial vaginosis is not one that we recommend screening for in asymptomatic women. In women who have symptoms, such as abnormal vaginal discharge, itching in the vaginal area, etc., screening would be recommended. And if it is identified during pregnancy, then you would have this be treated as bacterial vaginosis is associated in some women with a risk for preterm delivery. But again, this is not one of those routine infectious diseases which are screened for patients. It's really only in those that are symptomatic.
And since she has been prone to it in the past, she could talk with her obstetrician and just say, I've been prone. I've had this in the past, so should we be aware of this? And she will either test for it or will make a decision based on that. Let me put in a plug for the show that Dr. Franasiak just mentioned. It was really one of my favorite ones. The title of the subject matter was how the human microbiome affects fertility. It was a couple of years. I think it was the last show you were on, and it was a couple of years ago. And it is truly one of my favorites. It is fascinating. So just go to our website, creatingafamily.org, and search for microbiome, or you can search for Franasiak, Jason Franasiak, and either one, it will pop up. Really, really interesting, just fascinating subject. Okay, so let's talk about sexually transmitted diseases since we're kind of talking about that area of the body. What about herpes? What is the risk for a mom that has herpes?
So, that's a very good thing. Now, I think it's important to note, the herpes virus comes primarily in two types of forms, the herpes virus 1 and herpes virus 2. And herpes virus 1 is the most commonly associated with things like cold sores and things and infections of herpes of the mouth, whereas herpes virus 2 associated more with genital herpes infections. What we typically do, many patients will come knowing that they've had a risk of this in the past. It is also not one of the diseases that is routinely screened for in asymptomatic pregnant women. However, if there is concern that herpes virus, particularly of the genital tract, has occurred, it's important for you to contact your healthcare provider and go in for an examination and have that area tested. Those can be tested for the virus, and if it is positive, you ought to be treated for that virus infection and subsequently are placed on suppressive therapy so that the infection does not come back during pregnancy. One of the biggest concerns for herpes virus in pregnancy is active infection at the time of delivery, because the child passes through the vaginal canal and birth canal and may come into contact with active lesions, which could result in the child contracting the herpes virus. And neonatal herpes is a bit more concerning and scary than it is in the adults.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You don't want to have an active infection during birth, and again, your obstetrician can talk with you and work with you during pregnancy to hopefully prevent you having an active infection at the time of birth. What about gonorrhea or syphilis? That we don't hear about them as much anymore, but are they a concern? If a woman knows, I would assume if she knows she has them, she's going to go be treated for them. So it seems a little bit of a moot point here because she's obviously going to want to be treated. But nonetheless, what about those?
Sure. So, I think that in terms of some of the more common infectious diseases we see that are sexually transmitted in the United States, gonorrhea and chlamydia are kind of the two that go hand in hand. And there are recommendations for routine screening of all pregnant patients for gonorrhea and chlamydia. So for patients who come into prenatal care, and for those even who come into care seeking to get pregnant, many of them will have screening for gonorrhea and chlamydia. And you'd screen all patients in the first trimester at their first prenatal visit. And if they're at high risk for contracting gonorrhea or chlamydia, then they would be rescreened in the third trimester closer to the time of birth. And if they have a positive test, whether it be from a cervical swab or from a urine test, they should be treated for this infection and confirm that they have cleared this infection. Their partners should also be screened and tested and treated if they are found to be positive. And so it is important that you speak with your doctor, and those would be fairly routine things to screen for during pregnancy in order to optimize the pregnancy health.
We did get a question on chlamydia. Let me read that now. She says, I have had chlamydia twice in the past. As far as I know, I don't currently have it. I am trying to get pregnant. Do I need to worry about it for my baby? So this is someone who has had it twice in the past. So I would assume she is considered at risk for it. So this is certainly information she's going to want to share with her obstetrician. But is there anything before pregnancy? Should she be sharing this with her? I don't know if she has seen a fertility doctor or not. What should somebody do in her situation?
Yeah, so typically with chlamydia, those that are at risk are ones that have new or have had multiple sexual partners, or have a sexual partner who has a sexually transmitted infection, any sexually transmitted infection, or one that they've had themselves. So I think that if they're working towards getting pregnant, having a conversation with their doctor and determining whether or not screening for sexually transmitted infections prior to becoming pregnant is appropriate. And if any of those are positive, she should be treated for the chlamydia and have a test of cure in about 3 to 4 weeks' time after the treatment, and then be retested once again 3 months later to ensure that there is not a new infection or a recurrent infection.
And is this also the concern with the baby passing through the birth canal, the vaginal canal, and being exposed to the chlamydia during birth? Is that the primary concern with both gonorrhea and chlamydia?
That is correct.
Okay. And I think, let's just briefly touch on HIV. I think that women who have the HIV virus or AIDS are probably, and are trying to get pregnant, are probably already seeing a doctor. But let's talk some about that, because there's certainly been, at one point, quite a few years ago, women were encouraged not to get pregnant. But now, at least I think there's the belief that a woman can carry a baby safely if she has the virus. So what is the current thinking on HIV?
Yeah. So HIV is certainly one of those viruses that I think, again, many years ago caught the same type of mass media attention that perhaps Zika virus did, only on a much more global and bigger scale. And one of the big things with HIV was, of course, it confers significant morbidity and mortality, so risk of severe disease and death for both the person carrying it, the mother, and then also if the fetus were to contract it. And, there originally was very poor treatment for this. Nowadays, we have made great strides in this area. Routine screening for the disease is common, so anybody who is seeing a fertility specialist would have HIV screening. Anybody who is newly pregnant would have HIV screening, and anybody who's at high risk would have another round of screening in their third trimester, closer to the time that they would be delivering. Many of those individuals who are found to have HIV prior to becoming pregnant would be under the care of an infectious disease doctor who would be monitoring their viral load of HIV, as well as the other diseases which HIV can cause, and they would likely be on what we call highly effective antiretroviral therapy or highly active HAART therapy. And what you can do is you can greatly decrease the viral load to almost undetectable levels and get the immune system up to a point that it is healthy enough for the mother to carry a child. These women will always be considered high risk and watched much more closely in pregnancy than normal. But it certainly is very possible for a person with HIV to safely and successfully carry a child and deliver the child with relatively low risks of transmission. The risk of transmission never goes away, but there are things which are done to ensure that the viral load is kept low. Decisions which are made at the time of birth, whether it be a cesarean section or vaginal delivery, depending upon their viral load, and then counseling which goes on for protecting the child afterwards in terms of risk of transmission after birth.
Yeah, and that's, again, that is a routine test, is it not, in pregnancy?
It is a routine test, both in the fertility specialist's office as well as when you first go in for your prenatal care.
Excellent. And that's actually a good question. If you are seeing a fertility specialist and trying to get pregnant, that person, that clinic is going to be running a lot of these tests before they start treatment. So what do you what things do you typically test for before you start treatment on someone who is infertile?
It's a really great question. So we do routine screening blood work for individuals, and some of the various testing that we would do for them involves infectious disease screening and would focus a little bit on that. As mentioned, we do the gonorrhea and chlamydia urine screening for those that are, and then we also will screen for viruses which affect the liver, so the hepatitis virus, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C, and we will screen for HIV as well as screen for syphilis. And so those would be routine things that we would screen for individuals who would be coming in for their routine care. We also screen for other diseases which we want to ensure that individuals have immune reactivity against, such as rubella or varicella.
I was going to, first of all, tell us, rubella is what used to be called, I don't know if it still is, German measles. And it, way back when, was responsible for really significant birth defects, deafness, blindness, or maybe deafness, I'm not sure which. But anyway, significant. But now most people, I don't know, back by the 60s really, or maybe 50s, I don't even know, people were being routinely vaccinated for rubella. But now we've got a group of people who were raised by parents who had fears of vaccination or were concerned about vaccination. So rubella, I think that it's becoming more common now for people who are perhaps not quite yet, but will soon be reaching reproductive age to not be vaccinated. So what happens then if you've got a woman coming in who was not vaccinated? Let's just speak about rubella right now, since that's the one that we know for a fact causes significant birth defects.
Yeah. So for what we do at the preconception visit, so before you're pregnant, we want to screen for diseases which have effective vaccines, and the vaccinations are not safe to give during pregnancy because they contain a form of a live virus. So if we have individuals who missed their vaccination or have evidence in their blood that the vaccination may not have been as effective as what we would want, our very clear and unequivocal recommendation is that they go ahead and get revaccinated for these particular diseases so that they can have a period of time to wait after the vaccination, confirm that it was effective, and then begin working towards becoming pregnant. I think that if individuals are unwilling to be vaccinated, that involves a much longer conversation with your fertility specialist, and I would think also probably with a high-risk maternal fetal medicine doctor to describe the potential impact of contracting that disease in pregnancy and what that might really look like for your child.
Mhm. Yeah, that's I'm just out of curiosity. Do you see many people coming in now? I'm going to guess that you will start seeing more, but do you see many people coming in who don't have antibodies in their system against rubella?
It's not the most common thing we see for certain. We see it enough that that we certainly want to be screening for it. After a conversation with individuals, it's very rare that I've ever run into somebody who is not on board with the health benefits of moving forward with vaccination in order to either get their first vaccination or catch up on the vaccine if it's not effective in their system anymore.
Okay, so let's talk about other, I'm going to call them common childhood illnesses, even though that probably isn't fair. You mentioned varicella, which is chickenpox. Does chickenpox have, if the mom contracts chickenpox during pregnancy, are there birth defects associated with that infection?
Sure. So certainly that is one of the reasons that we look for it prior to conception to confirm that they are varicella immune, and therefore we certainly want to be sure that that they are. The risk to the mother, of course, is relatively mild, but for the children, we can certainly have additional concerns of having chickenpox in pregnancy, and you can have some neonatal varicella infections which can occur.
Okay, so something that would be associated with a poor outcome or potentially poor outcome for the pregnancy or for the child.
For those that have congenital varicella infections, they can have skin scarring problems, have underdevelopment of their arms or legs, inflammation in their eyes, or issues with their brain development.
Oh, so very serious. Okay. So those are the things that the general things. Anything else like that we have vaccines for, or is a fairly typical thing that children get and develop immunities to?
Well, I think one of the other things that is commonly talked about in pregnancy, a lot of those are the screening things, and we've talked about hepatitis, HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, rubella, and the varicella. I think one of the things we get concerned about in pregnancy is also influenza. Influenza is something that the common flu virus is something that, while it has less direct impact for like birth defects regarding children, the flu virus is a pretty serious thing, and is a very serious thing when you are pregnant. It is common every year to have many individuals who are at risk, and these are usually elderly folks or those that are pregnant, actually die from the flu. And I don't think people think a lot about dying from the flu. It's something that we think we kind of get for a couple of weeks and we feel crummy and it goes away. But it's a very serious illness when you're pregnant. And so talking with your provider during flu season about getting your vaccination, and ideally your vaccination should be by the end of October if it's at all possible during the flu year. And that vaccination is safe while pregnant. So getting that to decrease the risk of contracting influenza is important. And if you develop any symptoms during pregnancy, contacting your OBGYN early so that they can help manage these things for you.
Yeah, and from the flu, and I would guess other things like strep, and I'm thinking of strep because strep has been going around where I live like wildfire. And I would, from what you're saying, the risk is to the mom of complications for her which can certainly affect the baby, but it can also significantly affect the mom. That's my understanding. Is that the case with the flu and the strep both?
That's correct. You hear a little less about the strep virus, but for both of those, when we have impacts of the health of the mom, those things can certainly impact the health of the child without a doubt.
Okay, excellent. Now, we've mentioned, and I'm going to mention it again, and that is the CDC website is really a treasure trove of information. So if you are trying to get pregnant, there's a whole section on pregnancy, cdc.gov/pregnancy. And they discuss and give very practical information for you on everything we've talked about today. And if you are trying to get pregnant, number one, make certain you're talking with if you're at a fertility clinic, make sure you're talking with your reproductive endocrinologist. If you're not, talk with your gynecologist, and then also check out the cdc.gov website. Just a reminder to everyone that the information given today is general, and that if you want to understand how it applies to your specific situation, you need to work with your infertility or medical professional. And thank you so much to Dr. Jason Franasiak with RMA New Jersey for being our guest once again on Creating a Family. Jason, we really love having you. Thank you so much, and thank you for all you do, both on our board and otherwise, for Creating a Family. We appreciate it.
Well, Dawn, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on the show, and I think what Creating a Family does for so many people around the world is just wonderful, and I hope that some of the information today can be helpful to them as they're building their happy and healthy families.
Excellent. Thank you again. And to get more information about Jason, what is the website from RMA New Jersey?
It's www.rmanj.com.
And I just love it when people have easy URLs. That's an easy one. RMA New Jersey, rmanj.com. Thanks again, Dr. Franasiak, and to everyone else, thank you, and I will see you next week.
Everything you're hearing is from the Home Depot. From the baseboards and nails to these throw pillows, even those super soft sheets. Because now at the Home Depot, you can get everything for your bedroom, from wooden nightstands to modern benches. Save up to 25% on select bedroom furniture, plus free and flexible delivery and easy in-store returns. Shop decor now at HomeDepot.com. More saving, more kinds of doing. Valid on select items online only. Free delivery on select items $45 or more. Visit HomeDepot.com for more information.
Now at the Home Depot, save up to 35% off appliance special buys. Like the Samsung stainless steel side-by-side refrigerator, just $9.98. You save $300. It's big enough to hold 25 bags of groceries. Unload those, and if that makes you thirsty, you'll really love the external ice maker and water dispenser. Today is the day for doing. Spring Black Friday savings now at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing. U.S. only while supplies last. See store for details. Valid through April 17th.